Art, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Really looking forward to the conversation. As we were chatting off air, you know our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So as I open the show and answer this question to all our guests, ask this question to all of our guests, Art. What does scaling with purpose mean to you?
You know, it's easy to start something with an idea, and at that point, whenever you're in a really small enterprise, it's all hands on deck all the time. Everybody's got to do everything, and it's wonderful and it's exhilarating, but at some point, you have to go from trying to just get somebody somewhere to pay attention to you to building something that can be sustainable, that can be done every day, in which people have clear roles. And that switch is a hard one, because I think a lot of people thrive on the chaos of that early stage, and they're a little bit reluctant to give up some of the tasks that really ought to be done by somebody else, and to proceduralize some of the things that were done by the seat of your pants for a long time. And so you really need to be intentional about the role that you as a business leader are taking on, and to really begin to define what the other roles are, and to respect those roles and allow the people that you've hired to do their job, while at the same time doing yours and continuing to set the tone for where you'd like to go in the future. And as you point out, without doing that intentionally, you're likely to do it badly.
Yeah, I love that. And we use the analogy of the startup phase like a crazy road trip with the boys. You're waking up one sunny morning and decide to get into the car, pack the boot with some beers and some edibles, ring your mates and call around them. You don't really know where you're going, but the day is nice, and you'll follow, you'll end up somewhere, but the fun will be good. Scaling is very much a coach tour. It's organized. You have clearly identified the destination. You know your role. You've got X number of seats on the bus, and you identify who's going to be on that bus. And that the kind of insight of what got you to here won't get you to there is so critically important. We're going to get into that today in terms of actually changing habits and changing the way we do things. I would love to do a mini masterclass on your wonderful book, Art Smart Change, if you're up for that today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, look, before I kick off, I'm always curious, having just launched our book earlier this year and having gone through the process of thinking about the title, people may not appreciate just what goes into this. Why the title Smart Change?
So I'm particularly bad at titles of things, and so the first book I did was on effective thinking. I'm a psychologist by training, and I spend a lot of time worrying about thinking and habit change and all sorts of other things like that. And so with that first book, I initially called it something like Maximizing Your Mind or something, and my agent hated it, the publishers hated it. And when it finally got bought, we went back and forth on the title for quite a while, and ended up with the title Smart Thinking, which having done that book, I then decided, well, I wanted to do a book on behavior change. And so Smart Change seemed like a natural extension of Smart Thinking. And so we kind of eased into that one.
Very good. Well done. It's a wonderful read. It's a wonderfully practical read. You know, when we think of books on forming habits, on changing our habits, some seminal work like, Charles Duhigg, the Power of Habit, or certainly a lot of our listeners will be aware of James Clear's Atomic Habits. I encourage people to pick up your book, Smart Change. You mentioned right at the outset, Art, and I'll come to it in the book, actually. There's a wonderful line in this: changing behavior is hard, but it can be done. The central problem is that your motivational system is not extremely effective at helping you achieve your goals. If you want to change your behavior, you have to overcome the efficiency of this system. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, so the problem is, generally speaking, when there is some goal that you are systematically having trouble achieving, it is because you're doing something else. Most of us are not doing nothing, and particularly the folks who are listening to this podcast. You've got a bunch of busy people here who do a lot of things, and we actually don't notice our difficulties most of the time, because actually most of us, particularly listeners here, are pretty good at achieving most of our goals most of the time. But when you find that there's just something you haven't been able to do, then what's happening is you are being motivated on a day-to-day basis to do other things that aren't allowing you to take the actions you need to take to achieve the goal you're failing at. And so ultimately what you have to do is to try to figure out, how do I add more of those actions into my day so that the accumulated influence of those actions leads to the outcome that I haven't succeeded at yet. And that actually requires a lot of intention, because a tremendous amount of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, we're doing by habit. So we're not even really thinking about, how is it that I'm filling up my day? I'm just doing the next thing that I need to do, and not really realizing that I have to find a way to intervene on those behaviors in order to do something different so that I get the outcome that I want.
So let's just dive into this then, because you set out 5 tools for creating lasting behavioral change within the book. I love these, and the first, optimize your goals, then tame the go system, harness the stop system, managing your environment and engaging with others. You kick off with optimizing your goals. What can we do? And certainly those listening, those business leaders who have aspirations to scale, they'll be familiar with goal setting, but what can we do to optimize our goals?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that are important to do. The first is to really analyze your life to find those systematic failures. I tell people all the time that we fail at things all the time. That is, there's something we say on a given day we'd like to do, and then we don't get it done. Most of those failures are pretty benign. For example, what the kids these days call adulting is basically balancing out all of the different priorities that you have. And so on any given day, there's going to be something that you don't achieve because you're doing something else that's also important to you. The canary in the coal mine is systematic failure. It's that recognition that there's something that you really need to get done. And systematically, when you look back over a 2-month, 3-month, 6-month period, you realize, I'm not getting this done. Because that's the signal that if I keep acting the way I've been acting, I'm not going to get that achieved. So the first thing to do to optimize those goals is to identify, here's my systematic failure. And so I need to have a high level description of, this is the goal that I want to achieve, so that I have a kind of North Star that I can operate from. The second thing that's really important to do is to recognize that that goal needs to be what I call a positive goal rather than a negative one. Your motivational system is fundamentally designed to act. And so a lot of times when we fail, it's because we frame things negatively. I'm not going to do this anymore. You can't not do things. You can only perform actions. And so you need to find a way to reframe the statement of the goal in terms of, here are specific actions I'm going to take, rather than here's the thing I'm not going to do. And then the third thing that is really important to do in optimizing your goals is to do your best to find a way to create a process where that's the way you live your life. And as a side effect of living your life in that way, you will get the desired outcome. So, it's a lot of people will do things like say, oh, I've got to reach $20 million or 20 million euro in sales by this date. And so you then focus on achieving that outcome. And the problem is that you may end up doing things that are unsustainable. Right? You may burn through certain clients, selling them things that they don't really need in order to achieve that goal, where you make it to the goal, but you've burned a few clients who don't want to work with you anymore because they feel like they got oversold. And so instead, focus on what are the actions that you can take daily, weekly, monthly that are a process for running your life and running your business. And as a side effect of those good behaviors, you get the desired outcome. It's similar to, you and I were chatting off air about fitness. And people all the time will talk about, I've got to lose 20 pounds. And the problem is there's lots of ways to lose 20 pounds, and most of them are unsustainable. And so you sort of starve yourself and over exercise and do things that are thoroughly unpleasant. And then you lose those 20 pounds, and then you just kind of go back to doing what you were doing. And so then the weight drifts back up again, and you end up on that sort of roller coaster, as opposed to saying, look, I'm gonna, engage in a certain type of exercise and do that exercise on a daily basis, or, and I'm going to eat in a particular way. And it turns out that as a result of doing that, I will reach a healthy weight. But at no time was I really focused on the weight. I was focused on the lifestyle, and the desired outcome happened as a side effect of that. And in some sense, that, by analogy, is what you're trying to do in your business life as well.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much in this that I want to dive into. And I detest the word diet, I have to say, and all the different fads. And, what we really want is to create a process that encourages us and serves us to, and especially leaders of scaling businesses. I talk about good sense. Look after your sleep, your exercise, your nutrition, self-care, and that all season enduring growth mindset. But something that the penny dropped for me when I was reading your book. I coach CEOs and to support them in personal scaling as well as organizational scaling. And I remember a conversation with one CEO. He was really struggling with his weekends. He was living really well during the week, but on Saturday night he succumbed to more than a few beers. Sunday morning he ended up lying in late and feeling groggy then Monday, and it was kind of midweek before he was back up into his routine again. And he was really focused on stopping drinking on a Saturday night. And we just reframed that to say, well, Ola, what are you really passionate about? Do you love your kids? Yeah, of course I love my kids. I said, well, what about promising your kids to take them to the forest park at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning to give your wife a lie in? And, would you be motivated to do that? He said, absolutely, I would. Well, I said, well, that will then deal with the challenge you have of drinking on a Saturday night, because now your motivation on a Sunday is greater. That's essentially what you're saying there, Art. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You're finding something else to do that interferes with the thing you're trying to stop. And so by having this great opportunity to hang out with the kids on a Sunday morning, now Saturday night is done in preparation for being able to get up on Sunday to have that time with the kids. And so it's now a completely different way of thinking about what Saturday night is about.
Yeah, no, and it's it's just a reframing, but I've found it so powerful, both in terms of my coaching and in my own life. The North Star you mentioned, how far out should we go, and can you give any insight into the emotional attachment to that North Star? How do we create, it might sound like a silly question, but how do we actually create that North Star? Because incredibly, when I ask CEOs about their vision of the future, I often get a blank stare. A lot of them actually don't know what they want. They're caught up in the day to day and haven't taken the time to lift their head to actually think about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out. So how far out should we go? And then how do we bring that back to today?
Yeah, I'm actually a believer in a business context of having, if possible, maybe a Big Dipper rather than a North Star. So what we want to have is definitely a kind of 10-year goal of what do you want to say at some point. I often tell people that you want to be able to project yourself to the end of the road and look back. And that's something, human beings are really good at mental time travel. So at some point you want to be able to say, look, what would I like to be able to say about my business when I sell it, when I'm turning it over to my kids, whatever, but what I want to say that I accomplished with this, and to have that vision of this is really what success would mean for me. It's useful to have that as a sense of, okay, this is really what I want to do. And so it gives me an opportunity to determine whether the short-term actions I'm taking fit with the long-term structure I have. Now, on top of that, it's really useful to have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, because that time horizon gives you an opportunity to also begin to develop more specific metrics that can then guide the very specific actions you're going to need to take this week in order to begin to get yourself on the road there. So that 10-year time horizon is very abstract. I would like to be a business that is recognized in my community, or I want to be a national powerhouse. I mean, what do you want to be, right? And then you want to say, okay, so on my road to get there, 3 years from now, I'm going to need to have a client base of this size. I'm going to need to have sales of this size. I'm going to need to have this many retail outlets. I mean, I have to figure out, what does that really begin to mean on a 3-year basis? Because now I can begin to think about, okay, I can define those measurable outcomes that I can start to track, because I need some signs, right? One of the things I need is some sense of, am I succeeding or failing? And if I'm only living my day-to-day life, then I ride a crazy roller coaster in which every day that I get a new client, I feel great, and every day that I lose a client, I'm down in the dumps. And that roller coaster is stressful, and it leads to self-medication and all kinds of other bad outcomes. But if I understand what that 3 to 5 year goal is, then I can begin to average across my day-to-day a little bit and really stay focused on, okay, yeah, this client didn't work out. I didn't get this sale that I wanted, but look, I've got all of these irons in the fire. I'm ahead of my pace to get to where I want to get to. So I don't have to be devastated by today's bad outcome, because I realize where I am on the overall track that of what I'm trying to accomplish.
Oh, that's so profound, and that what you've just described will resonate with so many of our listeners. The high of winning the client, the low of not, and you call out a distinction between achievement goals and contribution goals. And if I go back to something you said earlier, that, let's say, the revenue goal, and we all find revenue goals easy to set, but I'd love to get into and explore your experience a little bit on this in terms of the difference. So if we say the £20 million revenue goal, if what I've encouraged our organizations to do is to convert that revenue goal. My background's finance, so I got it. I was juiced up in revenue goals, but I came to realize that not everybody was. But if you flip that revenue goal into a contribution goal, where we say we can impact the lives of 2,000 customers as a result, the byproduct will be £20 million revenue. Can you share with the listeners the importance of the distinction between achievement and contribution goals, Art?
Yeah. So I think that, that language, achievement and contribution, goes back to Peter Drucker, who was really, go back to the 1960s. He was one of the first management people who really began to think about the human side of what management was all about. And so his distinction, achievement and contribution, an achievement is if I look back over the last week, there's a bunch of things I ticked off my to-do list, and those are my achievements. But if I look back over the last 6 months or a year, that's my contribution, right? What I'm willing to say to you that I did over a 1 year long period, that's my contribution. And if you think about it, right, nobody's going to say, my contribution over the last year is that I answered 32,412 emails. Even though you may very well have answered that number of emails along the way, it had better have led to some other more significant impact. And I think that one of the reasons why reframing goals away from revenue goals becomes important is that really, when you start a business, when you run a business, and somebody says, well, what do? Do you want to say, I make 20 million pounds a year? I mean, that seems like a shallow description of what it is that you're accomplishing. To be able to say, my business has allowed 2,000 small businesses to thrive because we're providing logistics, or whatever your statement is, you are giving a statement of the real contribution, the real reason why your business exists. And so you want to have framed what you're doing in terms of something that you will be able to take some pride in. But not only that, by framing it in that way, it leads you to think differently about which options you should select when you're trying to decide what to do next. Because you can now begin to ask, am I the leader of the kind of company that would do this action? Is this really consistent with the contribution I'm trying to create? Almost anything you do can be justified in terms of its impact on the bottom line. But is that impact also getting you towards the real thing that you want to talk about with people?
Yeah. And our second principle of our ScaleX framework, our 10 principle ScaleX framework, is purpose and vision. And I'm curious, given your psychology background, the extensive research you've done on this, which is more motivating for us whenever we hit that challenge? Is it an achievement goal or is it a contribution goal?
So the funny thing is that in the moment, that achievement seems really important. I've got to answer that email. I mean, think about this, right? You're at home, you're at work. It's 6:15. The kids are going to be sitting down at dinner in 15 minutes. But I just want to answer this email because it's there in front of me. I promise you that email will be there tomorrow morning, and your kids will be done with dinner if you answer that email now. So which one's more important, right? But in the moment, that email feels like, well, I just got to answer that email. And so you have to really shift your attention. And because part of the problem with these contributions motivationally is they're abstract. And abstract things provide less of a clear draw on your motivation than very specific things. Again, I often try to pull this back into personal life for people so that they can really internalize it. No matter what I want my body to look like at some point in the future, that piece of cake in front of you right now looks better than your goal to fit in a particular swimsuit or whatever it is, in 6 months. And that's, we are constantly fighting against that. We're constantly fighting against the fact that the thing that is in front of you right now is going to feel more important than the things that probably actually are more important over the long run.
Yeah, I'm smiling here because I've been guilty of both of those over in the last hour as I sat down for lunch with my wife, and also ate the cake that I shouldn't had, but did the email while I was having lunch with my wife and ate the cake afterwards. So I would consider myself somewhat of a goal junkie. So how do we? Again, this will resonate with so many of our listeners. How do we overcome this? Art, you mentioned, you specifically call out what previous guests have referred to as doing a pre-mortem, setting, illuminating, highlighting the obstacles, the impediments to our goals. Can you share with our listeners the importance of that?
Yeah, so we have to plan well. It's really important to recognize that if you're going to succeed, then you're going to have to perform desirable actions regularly and minimize the number of undesirable things you're doing. And if you're going to do that, you can't wait until the moment and decide what to do. You actually want to be much more mindful about that. So you want to say to yourself, okay, look, what actions do I want to take? And then once I determine, okay, these are the actions I want to take, and now I need to know what's going to get in my way, what's going to prevent me from doing that, so that I can do two things. The first is get those actions onto my calendar. And literally, keep an agenda, keep a calendar, keep a to-do list, and make sure it's visible and available so that you can keep reminding yourself, this is the thing I need to be working on, because your emails will come in, there'll be phone calls, there'll be Slack messages. You will be getting draws on your time from all over the place. So you need to have that external reminder of here's what I need to be doing. So you need to do that. And then you need to, and the other thing about putting something on your calendar is, it's one thing to say, well, I need to do more of this. The problem is, that's an easy statement to make. I need to do more of it. The question is when, because, again, all of your listeners are people who are already really busy most of the time. And so abstractly, yeah, I need to do more of this, but when exactly? So when you put it on your calendar and you say, I'm going to do it at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, now, whatever you were doing at 9 a.m. on Tuesday before, you've got to decide, am I just going to stop doing that? Am I going to move that? If I'm moving that, what am I giving up? I have to grapple with the trade-offs in my life explicitly if I actually put the thing on my calendar, if I get that specific. And one of the biggest obstacles for almost all successful people is time. Where am I going to find the time to do this? And so it's getting to that level of specificity that forces you to deal with those trade-offs, that allows you to then begin to add this desirable set of actions into your day.
Yeah, and how you choose to focus your time and energy. Time is fixed. I mean, energy is the real currency here that we're talking about. Where you focus that energy is ultimately dictated or informed, instructed by the North Star, the big 10-year goal with greater pixelation 3 to 5 years. And I mentioned the outset a goal junkie. I mean, I plan my calendar literally 12 months out. There are certain things like the podcast recording. I know what the next 9 months schedule looks like, and it's on Tuesdays and it's at a certain time. That's all scheduled in, and that just gives me a sense of psychological comfort. I don't have to think about it. It's in the calendar, it's there. And the training, health and wellness is important to me, so my training is scheduled in there. And I find that actually my morning hours are my most productive, so I tend not to answer emails in the morning. What has your research led you to conclude about when we're most productive, Art?
Yeah, I think, the answer to that one, like the answer to every hard question in psychology, is it depends, right? There really are morning people and night owls.
Okay.
And so each of us needs to get to know, who are we? And that can shift over the course of our lives. So for example, teenagers tend to stay up late. That's just, we are wired to that. So teenager, early adulthood, you tend to be much more a night owl. And it tends to shift more towards the morning as you get older. So you got to get to know yourself a little bit and then respect that a little bit. And you need to get to know not just what hours of the day that you work best, but how many hours in a day that you can work and legitimately be able to get up and work again the next day. So, I think one of the things that happens is there are people who pride themselves on being in the office for 12 hours. I find that, there are some people who can do that, but I find most people who put in an actual 12-hour day are spending a lot of time doing what I affectionately call fake work, where you're sitting at your desk, but you're Googling stuff at random and you're really not doing anything particularly productive. I'm a big believer in work when you're at work and don't work when you're not at work. And so find those hours of the day that you work well. Try to clear some space if you can, as you do in those most productive times, to work on the things that are most important to you. Save stuff like email, meetings, other kinds of phone calls for the times that you're not quite as energized, because just the social interaction associated with those other kinds of activities will tend to give you enough energy to get through them productively. And then go home.
Yeah.
And when you're at home, do something else. Whatever it is, find that other thing that feeds you. It could be family, it could be exercise, it could be a hobby, it could be any and all of the above. But do those things and then come back to work refreshed. the next day, because all of the problems, all of the issues, all of the emails that you left behind will still be there in the morning, and the world will still be turning on its axis.
Yeah, sage advice. So we've set our goal. We have illuminated the likely obstacles that may impede us on the way by virtue of creating a plan. You mentioned then kind of taming the go system and harnessing the stop system. Can you explain to our listeners what the go and stop systems are to begin with?
Yeah, so the most people don't really know the structure of the human motivational system, but essentially the way motivation works is we have a bunch of brain structures that are really old, evolutionarily old. I mean, these are the structures that if you were to dissect the brain of a mouse or a rat or a sheep, you'd see similar structures. Those structures are involved in circuitry that finds goals that you have and energizes those goals. Because if you think about it, at any given moment, there's lots of different things you could be pursuing, and you only tend to pursue one thing at a time. And the thing that you're pursuing is what gets energized, which could be, I need to eat right now. That's I'm pursuing the goal of eating. Or this email came in and my attention got directed to it, and now I'm engaged in that goal, and that's what's energized for me in that moment. And when you energize a goal, it causes you to pay attention to things related to that goal. It focuses the actual energy you have on that. It actually causes you to de-emphasize other goals. And that activity of engaging a goal and then pursuing it, that is something that we're really good at as creatures. And that's what I call the go system, because it's really designed to get us to act. But every once in a while, we engage a goal that we don't really want to do at the moment. So we know we're supposed to go home to have dinner with the kids, and then an email came in. The go system says, ooh, an email, I should read that, and then I should answer it. So what prevents you from doing that is you have another set of brain mechanisms that involves circuitry that runs through the frontal lobes of the brain. So it's right above the eyes. There's an area of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. And it's got some circuitry in it that is part of a system that the technical word would be inhibits the actions that you don't want to perform. But, colloquially, I just call it the stop system. It's the thing that intervenes and says, no, don't do that. The problem with the stop system is it is effortful to engage. You've actually got to think, no, I'm not going to do this because I have to get home to have dinner with the kids. And so, and you have to really choose not to do that. The problem is that doesn't always work. Riding the brakes is a dangerous thing to do. The system is impaired by stress. So all of us have had bad days where we're just so stressed out that we just can't stop ourselves from doing all kinds of things. It certainly gets impaired by substances, right? Plenty of folks who are listeners will have had a situation in which they drank a little too much and then did something that they regretted later, because the stop system is impaired there. There's also some evidence that prolonged prolonged focus on stopping yourself from doing stuff will also impair that system. So, if you just have a hard day at work and you've got to be on your best behavior because you've got a bunch of clients who are really annoying, but you've got to keep that smile on your face and keep moving forward. At the end of the day, you're just sort of done. And now, if your kids annoy you, you might snap at them, or you might eat that extra piece of cake or whatever it is, because you just can't stop. And you just, at that point, it's like, enough. I can't keep stopping myself. So what that means is the real goal of changing behavior is not, how do I stop myself from doing the wrong thing? The real goal of changing behavior is, how do I ensure that I engage that go system, preferably habitually, often enough that the accumulated influence of the actions I take leads to a long-term desirable outcome.
Yeah. And I find, I've seen this at a personal level, at an organizational level, that too often, we wait for trauma in our lives to enact the change,
Yeah.
and what I always encourage, the CEOs that I certainly coach and that are going through our program, don't wait for the trauma, enact the change before the trauma
Yeah.
comes. How do we create that, let's say, call it false trauma or false urgency, or,
Yeah.
so ultimately that engages our go system instead of that direction in this
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, such a great question. It's funny. The most recent book I did is called Bring Your Brain to Work, and I talk a lot about people who choose to change careers. And I interviewed lots of people in preparation for the book, and the number of people that I interviewed who changed careers were miserable in the job that they had, and then only changed careers because they had some traumatic event. It could have been an accident or an illness of their own. It could have been the death of a loved one, but it was that thing that brought them up short and said, "Oh, I've got to change what I'm doing." So you're absolutely right. We often wait for that trauma to come. What I recommend is actually to go back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, to use that ability to do mental time travel and to make use of something that we know about regret. So the research on regret suggests that young people tend to regret dumb things they did. So, I drank too much and got sick, or I cheated on a test, or whatever it is. Most of those become really good stories as you get older. What older people tend to regret, I mean, obviously sometimes we do really dumb things that we regret throughout our lives, but most of what you regret as you get older tends to be the things you haven't done. Right? And that's the concept of the bucket list, is a reflection of here's a bunch of things that if I don't do them, I will feel bad that I didn't do them. And I think that one of the ways that we can create that artificial trauma is to project ourselves to the end of our lives mentally and say, if this were the end and all I had done was what I've done so far, what will I regret not having done? And then go back and start doing some of those things while you have the chance. And every few years, I find that to be an incredibly valuable exercise.
Yeah, I find, back to the motivational system and the fact that this efficiency actually serves, when it's orientated in the right way, it's just so wonderfully powerful. I have a morning routine now that I don't have to think about at all. And it's wonderful and it serves me and I feel great. But for many of us, and I'd be, I'd love to hear some of the things from yourself that we should call out if we start saying these things, to say you're not listening. So some of the things I hear, well, now's not a good time, and we're, the community I'm dealing with, these are incredibly intelligent people, and you can rationalize and justify so much. So now's not a good time is a wonderful one, in terms of why would I scale? Look at the economy at the moment, high interest rates, high inflation. This is, maybe next year. That's a classic. I don't have the money right now. Certain things are going on a personal level, but I'll have that all sorted out in 6 months and I'll engage in this new behavior then. Are there certain things that we should be aware of and kind of call it out?
Yeah. I love that. And I think there's a couple, right? One of which is, I'm not the right person to do this.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things that I often ask is, well, if you don't do it, who would do it? And do you think that they're better at this than you are? And so, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I may not be the perfect person to do this, but that doesn't make me the wrong person to do this. And I think that's a really
I love
valuable one.
that.
I think the other one that holds us back a lot is just I don't know what's going to happen. Well, you know what? Nobody knows what's going to happen. I mean, that's part of the fun of it, I mean, when you embark on engaging in small business, the reason you do that is because there's something that you'd like to achieve that you can't achieve by going to work for a bigger ship. Big companies are more stable. They provide a lot more certainty. but there's a cost to that. You don't have that opportunity to shape things the way you'd like to shape them. When you take on that responsibility to run a small business, you think, okay, well, I want to do this because I want to do this my way. But then when it comes time to scale, you think, but well, what if, I don't know, I could ruin everything for this. Well, yeah, you could, but the fact is that as a small business, you're much more at the mercy of forces beyond your control. If you can scale, then you actually can provide yourself a little bit more stability, despite the valley of death, despite the difficulties that are inherent in scaling successfully. And so you're never going to feel like I know what's going to happen, but you can't let that get in your way.
Yeah, perfection is often the enemy of progress, and certainly I deal with a lot of CEOs who are perfectionists and
Yeah.
want the thing absolutely right.
I gotta tell you, it's funny. I mean, I work at a university. I work for a very large university, but I have been pretty entrepreneurial in my time here. I started a master's program. I now run our continuing and professional education programs at the university, and so we're constantly trying new things. One of the things that I tell my team all the time is, look, just get a B minus, right? You don't need to get an A. Just get a B minus. We'll fix it and we'll turn it into an A later. And it's really important, because we have a lot of perfectionists here too, who just think, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not sure I can do it. And I tell them, look, a B minus is good enough.
Yeah, I love that, and you reference a similar kind of example in the book of your students, who are perfectionists, who are really struggling with their dissertation, and they're kind of they're ripping it up, they're not getting started, it's not good enough to hand in, and your retort back, well, if it's perfect and you hand it in now, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Where's the learning?
I've always told people, if my graduate students, if your dissertation is the best piece of work you ever did, then the day you turn in your dissertation, you're like Ringo's Star on the day that the Beatles wrote it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Moving on to the fourth tool of smart change, managing your environment. How important is our environment, Art, in the context of seeding great habits towards our North Star goal?
Yeah, I think we forget sometimes that we're creatures. We're animals. We are, the brain is designed to help the body get around. And there's a real deep connection between the body and the mind. And consequently, the environment drives tremendous amounts of your behavior. It's the reason why having that email list up all the time draws your attention to it. And, because it's there, it's right there physically in your environment. And so, I think the basic principle that we need to get everyone to internalize is that you want to make desirable behaviors easy and undesirable behaviors hard. And that will have a profound influence on your success. So, as someone, I exercise frequently. I've got my exercise equipment. I've got a little room in the house with all the exercise equipment in it, so that I can just walk in there and get right to it. I don't have to pull anything out. I don't have to set anything up. It's just there, and I can do the work. And it's, I think in general, the easier you make it to do something, the more likely you are to do it. And that it's just that should be true in your personal life, and it should be true at work. You should structure your work environment to make really desirable things to do as easy as possible for you and for all the people that you're working with.
Yeah.
You want them to structure their environments in ways that make it easy for them to do the right thing.
Yeah, I see this time and time again, and you shared with me off air the fact that you've just recently completed an Olympic triathlon. Unfortunately, you had an accident on your bike then subsequent to that, but you and I will both understand the importance of, whenever you embark on, let's say, cycling or swimming or a sport like triathlon, getting into a club. I knew nothing about swimming. I knew nothing about biking. I did a little bit of running, But I joined the local triathlon club, and very quickly they were able to, a couple of the guys were able to direct and inform me, here's the guy you should buy your bike from, here's what you need to get. Here's the coaching classes on a Thursday for swimming. Go and see Noel. He's wonderful. And when you're in that group, and they said on our Sunday rides, by the way, are at 9:00. So come along at 9:00. I got the bike that they recommended, and very quickly, having, done some cycling on my own prior on another bike, within months, I was cycling at a rate that I could never have perceived. They put me into the center of the peloton, and very quickly you're mimicking the behavior. They've give ideas on nutrition, on the gels you take, all of those things that just become easy because I put myself in that environment.
Yeah. Well, and you did two things, right? Because you created that environment, and then you did, if you think about the last tool of the in the book, you also engaged with the right people. And the thing about being human is we come pre-wired with very little knowledge. We don't really know much. What we're good at is learning from other people. Yeah. And so by joining the group, not only were you in an environment in which you could mimic the pedal stroke and the cadence of other people, you could look at how they were shifting gears and doing all sorts of other things that where you were probably, you were probably on the, the big front ring and all the time. And, there's lots of things you learn once you start watching other people. But at the same time, it's not just the environment, it's also that people will teach you things. I know that I didn't have any cold weather gear when I started cycling. And so one of the things I got taught really early on was how to actually dress properly for chilly weather, which we do have here in Texas. And
we learned that very early on in Ireland, Art.
Yeah. Well, it's just getting chilly here, but we ride at dawn, right? Which so 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:45, and it'll be in the winter 42 degrees when you get started. You got to have the right stuff. Somebody will show you all that. Yeah. And generally speaking, you should never be afraid to let people teach you things that they do well. And one of the things that happens to people who are small business owners, who are entrepreneurs, is you have a certain amount of success, you begin to believe, what, I need to do this on my own. You don't. There is no reason for you to make a mistake that somebody else has already made. You can make new mistakes, but you should learn. You should be humble enough to learn from other people all the time. And it's funny, every 10 years or so, I take up something brand new. 15 years ago, it was about 15 years ago, I took up the saxophone, right? And more recently, took up a lot of the cycling and a little bit swimming in a little bit more of a serious way. Part of the reason for doing that, I mean, there's lots of reasons to do that, but part of the reason is to remind yourself that no matter how successful you are at anything else, there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know how to do. And that you need to remind yourself, I can always be learning from somebody else, no matter how successful I am at anything. And so for me to be when I took up my saxophone, the very first night, I got my sax teacher taught me how to get a sound out of it. I went home and spent like 25 minutes playing it. And the next morning, my oldest son came toddling out of his bedroom and he said to me, "Were you playing your new saxophone last night, Daddy?" And I said, "Yes, I was." And he said, "I thought so. It sounded like you were moving chairs in the kitchen." Right? And it was that reminder of, wow, I really suck at this. But what that does is to remind you, what, you can always learn from other people. And you should never be too proud to acknowledge that there's somebody else who knows some stuff you don't, who can teach you to be better at what you do.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I want to piece the different elements together there just from that. And for anyone who's curious, Professor Art Markman is also a wonderful saxophone player. He set himself the North Star to join a band 15 years ago, and that was your North Star then. And if you're curious, go in and Google Phineas Gage. We maybe put a link in the show notes if you're up for that, Art. So
Absolutely.
get your material out there. And I think it's just wonderful. The what I always say to people, as you've said, don't struggle with this, because if you're struggling, somebody else has encountered that struggle before you, and there will be lots written about the struggle. A big part of our inspiration and motivation for writing our own book, kind of shameless plug here, but we wrote it because I didn't have access to this 15 years ago, and it's the book that I wanted to read back then. But if we use the cycling analogy in the context of scaling wasn't a thing back in 2006, 2007. It's only entered our lexicon in recent years, really. And there's lots written about, there's lots of stuff online there. We've put together our own framework to support CEOs on that journey. But I think of the kind of the cycling analogy, our programs like coming into the cycling club, and we literally hand the CEOs the bike, we fit it for them, we ask them to get on, and now come cycle with us. We've mapped out the route, just follow us. Prior to that, it's like being handed bits of a bike when you've an aspiration to ride a bike. And first of all, you've got to actually work out how all of these bits go together. So, what's the interplay of vision and values? What's the context of purpose or mission? What does culture actually mean? All of these bits, where does a plan come into all of this? How do I measure performance? By the time you consider all of these bits, you're already exhausted, and that's before you even embark on scaling. But now all of that information is actually there, and you've written wonderful books in the context of change behavior. Conscious of time, but just there's a couple of other references you make, phrases you use in the book that I'd like you to share with the listeners. One is consistent mapping, and the other is repetition. Can you just call out the importance of consistent mapping and what that is, Art, and then repetition in that context?
Yeah. So when you develop habits, we've talked a lot about just creating good actions, but how do those actions become habits? How do they become the thing that you do mindlessly on a daily basis in a particular environment? And the way that you do that is a simple formula. You start with what's called a consistent mapping, which means that, fundamentally a habit is a memory. It is a relationship between the situation you're in, both the mental and physical situation, and the action you're going to perform. And you need to have a consistent relationship between those. If the environment is always changing, it's hard to develop a habit. If the action you're supposed to take in a given environment is always changing, you can't develop a habit. The only way you can develop a habit is if you're always performing the same action in the same situation. We construct our environment like that a lot. If you think about your car, for example, you have an accelerator and a brake pedal. They're always in the same location. Why? Because if they constantly shifted their location, you'd have to be looking down and checking every time to see if you could find it. And then you wouldn't be able to create a habit, and that would be disastrous. So you want to build environments that have that kind of consistency in them so that you know what to do when you get into that situation. Or if you're trying to break a habit, to disrupt that environment so that you can't perform the habit. But you need to have the consistent mapping. And then if you're going to build a habit, because they're memories, what the idea behind habits is you are faster to retrieve the memory for what you're supposed to do than you are to think about what you're supposed to do. And so you need to repeat the behavior in the situation often enough that you have enough memories that you can retrieve the right thing to do quickly. And that's fundamentally what habits are all about. And so when you think to yourself, okay, I need to build better habits, what you need to do is to look at the environment you're in and ask yourself, can I build an environment that routinely suggests this next action for me to perform? Can I set up that environment in a way so that I don't have to think about the correct action? I can just do it. And then that becomes my habit. And then, I get all the benefits of being able to do this without having to think about it.
Yeah, I love that. And we had Dr. Jim Lear on the podcast last season. He talked about, us as animals, we're stingy with our energy. We want to preserve our energy because ultimately energy is the currency of our lifeblood. Our mind hasn't evolved to suggest that actually we may not have to hunt for our food this evening. So I want to preserve my energy in the cave right now. So which is why we build habits in the first instance. And I've become fascinated with this and why we do the things that we do, and certainly even the first 7 years of our lives, unconsciously or subconsciously, we're simply mimicking the behavior of our parents, of our school teachers, of what's happening within our environment. So, as a kind of a self-reflection, self-analysis, the examining some of those self-limiting beliefs that are now habituated, I think, is critically important. And you have provided those who read your book with a link to the Smart Change Journal. Art, can you share with us the importance of the journaling as we progress on this habit changing journey?
Yeah, it's a lot of behavior change, and particularly habit change, requires making mindful lots of things that you were doing mindlessly. And
Yeah.
that means taking a step back from your life and actually writing a bunch of stuff out. And so what the Smart Change Journal does, and I, the journal's available for free, regardless of whether you choose to buy the book or not. But of course, it tracks a lot of the stuff that's in the book. But the idea behind the journal is it's a bunch of exercises about writing out the goals that you want to change, developing those really good plans, figuring out what the obstacles are, understanding what signals there are going to be that will tell you that you're succeeding or failing, identifying what your habits are, tracking your habits through a habit diary so that you again bring to mind things that you have been doing without thinking about them in the past. And basically taking all of these tools, thinking about the environment, maybe even sketching that environment to think about how to improve it, thinking about the people in your life who can serve as mentors, thinking about the people who you might want to hang out with because they're just doing good things and you want to be around them. All of that is stuff that you can begin to start by thinking about explicitly so that you can bring more of that into your life and then turn that into the better set of habits for the future.
The last hour has absolutely flown, Art. I love this. I love your material, and hopefully you'll agree to come back on another time. Is there anything before we move into the close? Anything that you wish to address or to share with our listeners before we get into the timeless takeaways that we haven't covered off today that you think we should share with the listeners before we close?
Yeah, thanks for this conversation. It's been great fun. And I will say the one thing I would add is to bear in mind as a leader that the tools of influence when you're trying to affect someone else's behavior are also the tools of behavior change. That is a lot of times as a leader, what you're trying to do is to influence other people's behavior. And all of the work that you need to do to change your own behavior is the work you need to think about as a leader in order to influence the behavior of other people. And a lot of times as leaders, we shift from thinking about all the hard work we do to change our own behavior to just messaging. If I could just think of the right thing to say to the people working for me, they would change their behavior. And then we're surprised when our message doesn't do the trick. And that's because we have to be mindful about all of the steps that someone has to go through in behavior change when people are working for us, and lead them through that same process that we go through when we're changing our own behavior.
Yeah, I love that. So profound. In closing, Art, given the very rich life that you've lived to date and the wonderful experiences that you've had, including being on stage with your jazz band, can you provide our listeners with 3 timeless takeaways?
Yeah, the first thing is be open to what life has to offer to you. I tell people all the time, don't edit your life story in the forward direction. The world is way more interesting than your imagination is. So allow wonderful things to come to you and adapt to them instead. I think that's absolutely critical. I think the second thing is to remember that any attempt at behavior change is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Don't allow the step back to lead you into behaviors that destroy your opportunity to change behavior. It is what you do when there's a step back that determines your ultimate success. And the third thing to remember is that the work will always wait for you. So go home, do the other things in your life, spend time with your family, do your exercise, engage in your hobbies. It is that the well-rounded life feeds back positively on your ability to be successful at work for many reasons, not only from a well-being standpoint, but also because the things that you learn when you do the other things in your life often provide unexpected and valuable insights into the problems that you're trying to solve at work.
I love that. I really love that. Thank you for sharing that. Art, I want to acknowledge you for the wonderful work that you do, for the selfless service to an incredibly wide-reaching audience, and for sharing your time and energy with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you on the show. What's next for you?
I write regularly for Fast Company and Psychology Today. I have my own podcast called Two Guys on Your Head, and I'm gonna do a lot of that. And I'm thinking about the next book, and I run a lot of stuff here at the university. So I am so lucky to just have so many opportunities. It's great fun, really.
Oh, brilliant. Well, look, if people want to connect with you, which I've no doubt they will, Art, where best to reach you?
Easiest place these days is LinkedIn. It's a wonderful platform. I think it's where we connected, and and I post links to stuff that I write, try to give away as much of what I do as I can. And would love to hear from people.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thanks again. Keep doing your great work. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you today. Thank
Well,
you,
thanks
Art.
so much. This is a great conversation. Hopefully we'll have a chance to do it again soon.
Yeah, look forward to it. Take care.
Excellent.